Hi there. The idea for this whole video came about after a comment was left by Craig, Chicken of the Woods. He does some metal detecting, bottle digging and flint hunting, and I'll pop a link to his channel in the description. Anyway, Craig commented on our last video where we'd found a small metal ring. I'm sure every detectorist has found these small metal rings. Anyway, we had no idea what it was other than to have a guess at a horse harness loop. Definitely not Celtic ring money. But Craig suggested looking up Dorset buttons. We'd never heard of them before. And a quick Google really piqued my interest. And because I do all sorts of crafting, you name it, I do it, crocheting, knitting, painting, etc. I thought I'd have a go at making one. Anyway, back to the history of the Dorset buttons. The actual origins of the Dorset buttons remains a bit of a mystery. Abraham Case, while serving as a soldier in France during the 30 Years' War, either got inspired by seeing the soldiers making replacement buttons for their uniforms by twisting cloth over a form, or he'd seen lace buttons that they made in Brussels. Either way, whatever he used as a basis would develop even further when he settled in Dorset. Dorset in the 1600s are mainly agriculture and sheep-based industries, but Case wanted something more for him and his wife. Up until this point, the use of buttons in everyday British clothing was not especially common. Buttons were widely used in mainland Europe, but we lagged behind, and most of our garments were fastened with laces or pins. So Abraham Case and his wife set themselves up making thread-covered buttons. The early Dorset buttons used sheep horn. The top quality buttons were called high tops, which used the very top of the horn as a form, and this was covered with linen and stitched in place, and these buttons were sought after by the nobility. The second grade button was called Dorset knobs, and these used a round disc of horn, also covered with linen and stitched in place. During the early decades of Case's button manufacturing, the fashions of mainland Europe finally made their way to Britain, and the use of buttons to fasten garments became way more popular than laces and pins. Abraham had to take on a larger workforce to meet demand, and so started the cottage industry of Dorset buttons. The business remained unchanged for about 100 years until Abraham's grandson took over, Peter Case. By this time, sheep horn was becoming problematic as supply was dwindling. So Peter developed a special rust-resistant metal alloy that could be formed into wire, which then could be formed into rings and then dipped in solder, and it became a seamless form. And these were distributed amongst the workers, where a network of threads would be woven or stitched to fill the ring, which created what is now known as the Dorset button. Both the manufacturing of the rings, the soldering process and the final sewing of the buttons employed thousands of people in the Dorset area in the late 1600s and the majority of the 1700s. And the demand for buttons was so high that being involved in the buttoning industry was far more lucrative than any agricultural industry. The demand for Dorset buttons exploded. Not just women sewing them, but children were often employed to make the rings. These were called twisters, the individuals who twisted the metal into rings. And dippers, they were the ones that dipped the rings into solder. And stringers, they were the ones that strung several rings together. The business had to be organised more effectively, so depots were set up throughout Dorset where individuals could drop off their finished buttons in exchange for payment, as well as pick up more materials. A good button maker could make up to 72 buttons a day, which could earn them 3 shillings. There were several grades of button quality. They came on a card, as do buttons today. Pink card denoted the highest quality for the nobility. Black card represented second-grade quality and were mainly used by the middle classes, and buttons sold on yellow card were of the lowest quality and destined to be used on work clothes. The sorting and sewing of the buttons onto the card was often the work of children in orphanages. Many different styles of Dorset button emerged throughout the centuries of manufacture, and they were exported all over the world. This hugely successful cottage industry came to a screeching halt when Benjamin Ainsworth patented and showcased his button making machine at the Great Exhibition in 1851. The machine could make cloth-covered metal shank buttons at a rate that far exceeded that of the handmade button, and it wasn't long before the Dorset button industry collapsed, leaving thousands unemployed and destitute. In the early 1900s, Florence, the Dowager Lady Lees, is responsible for saving the art of Dorset buttons. She visited farms and cottages all over Dorset to discover how the buttons were made, and she set up a small business specialising in the production of parliamentary buttons for Dorset MPs in their respective constituency colours. And by 1908 these buttons were back in full production, but it was brought to an end by the First World War. Today, Dorset buttons are a heritage craft, and the skill of buttoning continues, although they are now generally made and used into works of art. Rumour has it that Charles I went to his execution wearing a waistcoat with Dorset buttons, although the garment has never been found, so is there any truth in the rumour? We don't know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I, for one, think it's fascinating. I really enjoyed making one, and shall make a few more and try and hone the craft. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and we'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to check out Craig Chicken of the Woods. Thanks very much for listening.